Welcome to Insights for Manufacturing, the podcast that supports the UK manufacturing sector. Hosted by Jeff Beecham, the manufacturer's recruiter. Hello and welcome to another episode of Insights for Manufacturing. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, Lucinda O'Reilly, who is the founder of the International Trade Consultancy. Welcome to the show, Lucinda.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Glad for you to join me. I think you and I met at one of the exhibitions in Birmingham at the NEC, didn't we, last year? I can't remember which one it was.
It may have been Advanced Engineering.
Advanced Engineering.
Soon, yeah.
Yeah, so there we go. It's almost a year since that meeting. So glad to have you on the show. So we're going to be talking about international trade. Incidentally, my very first guest on my first episode of this podcast was Terry Schooler, chairman of the Institute for Export and International Trade, and that was back in March 2022. Quite a lot's happened since then. So from your perspective, how has the landscape of international trade evolved since then, concerning the UK?
Yeah, it's complex, definitely. And interestingly, I should probably start by talking about some of the things that were supposed to have changed, but for one reason or another have been delayed, because that's just as problematic for businesses who are trying to plan and get ahead. And one example of that would be the implementation of phase 5 of the new computerized transit system. So transit is a very useful customs procedure that many countries around the world have signed up to the Common Transit Convention, and it allows traders to move goods through several customs territories without paying import duty and needing a new customs declaration each time.
Yep.
But the system's rather rigid at the moment, and phase 5 was designed to allow more flexibility, which would be very useful for traders and customs brokers. But that's been delayed, and inevitably that's going to have a knock-on effect to other programs that are being rolled out at the moment, such as the new Customs Declaration Service, which is the software that's used to manage all the imports and exports for the UK and keep track of what's coming in and going out of the country. Another thing to talk about, I'm sure you've seen in the news that rules of origin requirements regarding electric cars were due to come into effect on January 1st next year. And that would have mandated that 45% of electric vehicle parts by overall value and 60% of the electric battery must be sourced in the UK or the EU. Now, Jeff, you and I are both following Andrea Wilson's campaign for a Minister for Manufacturing or just, even a nice coherent industrial strategy would be good, because we have not had one for many years now. And as a result, we just don't have the manufacturing capability for electric batteries in this country to come even close to complying with that rule of origin. So that the tariffs when we export our electric vehicles would have been astronomical.
Yeah.
And as 80% of British manufactured cars are exported, obviously not all of them are electric, but it gives you an idea of the damage that could do to our automotive industry.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, we buy a lot of German and French cars in this country, and so it's equally in the EU's interests to not implement that particular rule that was supposed to be coming in January as stringently as was planned. But the uncertainty has been a huge distraction for businesses.
Yeah.
It's not good for anybody. October 1st, so just a few weeks ago, we saw the introduction of the next phase of the Windsor framework, which brings in new customs rules and checks on goods moving between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. And the new stage sees the introduction of the green lane and red lane system. So 2 sets of customs checks will be performed according to where the goods are going. If they're just going to Northern Ireland, then they go through the green lane and they're subject to minimal checks and to qualify for that, you have to sign up for, we're calling it a sort of trusted trader scheme, but you've got to get authorization from HMRC and be able to
Yeah.
prove the goods are staying in Northern Ireland. But if they are likely to be going across the border to Ireland or over to the continent, then more comprehensive checks and more documentation will be required. But nevertheless, I mean, it's a positive development.
Yep.
Food sold in Northern Ireland will be subject to UK food standards now. So that's going to put an end to the much covered sausage wars, if you remember, at the beginning, just after we left the EU.
Yeah.
When there was a fear that there might be a ban on chilled meat products being sold in Northern Ireland from Great Britain. So, very, very slowly progress is being made in that direction. And there's been positive developments as well. I don't want to sound too gloomy. So, for example, the digitalisation of trade. In September, the UK implemented the Electronic Trade Documents Act, and that gives digital trade documentation the same legal footing as paper-based equivalents.
Yeah.
And a fully digitalised shipment was sent from Burnley to Singapore very shortly after the Act was brought in, and we're the first of the G7 nations to do this. The government's saying that it's going to yield 1.14 billion benefit to the UK economy in the next 10 years. So that's definitely a very positive development, and good that we're right at the forefront of implementing that new technology, because it could be a real game changer.
It makes a change for us to be at the front rather than following others, doesn't it?
I mean, we work in the manufacturing sector, so you and I know as well as anybody that you never hear about the good news stories. You don't hear about the huge numbers of UK manufacturers who are doing a fantastic job and exporting very successfully. All you hear is about, when a plant gets closed down. But let's not get into that. That might be another podcast. But we also made progress with a number of trade agreements. Some of them are building on what was rolled over from the EU, like Vietnam and South Korea. And then we've got new ones with 6 of the US states, which could be beneficial for some companies. And a huge amount of work has gone into the India trade agreement, which hopefully is pretty close to completion now. And that could be very important for British manufacturers and food producers as well to know about.
It's a huge economy and another large industrial nation, isn't it? I think that
absolutely
the power's sort of shifting from China, isn't it? For India's the next big thing.
Very much so, yes. Extremely well-educated, young population. So, a very good trading partner to have an agreement with would be extremely beneficial to our economy, I think.
Yeah. What are the main sort of challenges and opportunities you're seeing at the moment for UK manufacturing?
Well, I mean, as I've just been talking about, there are so many changes constantly going on in international trade. And so the main challenge is just keeping up to date with the ones that affect your particular industry and the markets that you trade with. It's, if you're an SME manufacturer, when you're focused on sales and marketing and innovating and production and, the challenges of running a business, to also stay abreast of legislative changes that may affect how you're able to do business internationally. It's a big ask. And it's also really frustrating when they spend time and resource planning for a change in customs procedures or legislation, and then it gets delayed. They could have been doing something much more productive with their time. So that's that's a huge bugbear for a lot of manufacturers, I know. But there are also, to talk about opportunities, understanding special procedures is something that I really, really urge all manufacturers to look into. I mentioned transit earlier, which hope it was pretty clear, how that could save money in duty and VAT when you're going through different customs territories.
Yeah.
Other ways of doing that would include using customs warehousing, which a lot of people don't know about. Inward and outward processing, you can reduce your duty liability there as well. In the last few years, the UK's network of free ports has expanded significantly. And there were a lot of companies who were thinking of setting up manufacturing in the EU. And my advice is always, well, actually think about relocating to a free port in the UK instead, because you get huge tax benefits and significantly reduced customs requirements that you have to comply with, and you're staying in the UK without having to, it's not an easy thing to set up a manufacturing plant abroad. So those are some of the opportunities that I would draw people's attention to.
And where, just on the free ports, I'm not fully up to speed with was there one in the Northeast? There was a new one, I think, in the Northeast.
Yeah, there's a very successful one in the Northeast. Yep. That's right. Yeah. Then we've got one around the Thames. We've got Felixstowe.
Yeah.
Liverpool is doing really well. Southampton. Where are the others? I think Plymouth, maybe one, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, we've got 8 up and running properly at the moment, and they're a useful alternative if you are thinking of relocating for whatever reason.
Yes, and let's just repeat that message for any businesses that might be looking to relocate. Don't relocate outside the UK. Get and relocate to where there's a free port. So yeah, great bit of advice there. Okay, so crikey, there's loads of geopolitical stuff going on at the moment, affecting pretty much all parts of business and society. Have you got any, strategic recommendations for UK manufacturers to help them remain competitive internationally? There's always these bolts out the blue, something kicks off in some part of the world, and then it's people have to change what they're doing, or it's just shifting sands all the time, isn't it? What advice could you give to businesses that looking to compete internationally?
Yeah, protectionism is becoming more of an issue these days, and with the invasion of Ukraine and what's happening in Israel and Gaza at the moment, there are so many areas that are looking quite unstable, and it's very nerve-wracking if you trade internationally, because, as you say, one minute you're doing business quite happily, and the next minute you could suddenly find the rug pulled out from under you. So the first thing I would always say is never put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't focus too much on just one area. Always have alternative suppliers, not just in your back pocket, but if you can, and I've worked in manufacturing for many years, so I know this isn't always possible, but try to buy from as wide a range of suppliers. Always have at least 2 or 3 suppliers of a particular, an important raw material or component. So that if a pandemic suddenly hits and all the factories in China shut down, you're not completely hamstrung by it. Or if the USA suddenly decides to slap 25% tariffs on your product that you've been selling there tariff-free for donkey's years, then you've got all alternative markets to sell to. You need to monitor the geopolitical situation on a weekly basis. Again, it goes back to how much time you've got, but good communication with suppliers and customers is absolutely paramount. The people on the ground will be able to give you a heads up long before you read it in the paper or hear about it on the television. And then sort of more specific things you can do. Again, I'm going to go back to special procedures, because not enough companies are using them, and they are paying duty unnecessarily, and they are restricting their cash flow unnecessarily by not taking advantage of them. keep an eye on the terms of new trade agreements. If you're already exporting to one area of the world, shouldn't be too complicated to start selling somewhere else.
Yeah.
And again, it's good for the resilience of your company to have as many export markets open to you as possible. And let's not forget, products manufactured in the UK are still hugely in demand and very highly regarded around the world. So take advantage of that. But yeah, and also going back to reviewing your international suppliers, that's especially true for your logistics providers. Don't just assume that the company that moves your goods to the EU very competently would be equally as good when you need to ship stuff to the USA or Asia, because they all have their specialties, and prices are quite fluid at the moment as well. So it's always a good idea to shop around and see if anyone's offering a better price than what you've been quoted from your usual supplier.
Yeah. So a big chunk of work then. I mean, this is all going to be taken up by purchasing, procurement departments and leaders, isn't it? Certainly on the sort of supply side, and I suppose it sort of underpins the need for the whole organisation to be talking to one another. There's no room for silos.
No.
Your salespeople, talking regularly to the customer, and then cascading what those needs and demands are going to be through the business, planning, manufacturing, and then purchasing. These are the people that have got to not just get the materials and the components in, they've got to make sure that the prices are right and the delivery times all align. It's I think for most people that don't work in manufacturing, and I supply manufacturing, I don't work in manufacturing anymore. I used to years ago. But people that haven't worked in manufacturing, I think they probably underestimate the actual complexity of what it takes to run a manufacturing business where you've got international customers and international supply as well as the stuff on your doorstep. So it's never easy.
No, that's right. That's really brilliant advice. The different departments mustn't be siloed, especially I used to work in the sales side of it, and it's always a customer asks you for something, and your first instinct is always to say yes to get the sale. But then when you go and talk to the people who've actually got to ship it out there, you've agreed to something that's going to have cost implications potentially, or affect the lead times. So yeah. The other thing I really wanted to bring up today that not many people are aware of is foreign currency. People often don't think about FX and just manage it all through their banks. And I strongly advise against that, because if you use a proper FX platform, you'll get a much better rate and you'll get proactive advice as well, as to when would be a good time to buy and sell the currencies that you're trading in. So if you take anything away from today, start looking for FX platforms rather than doing it through your bank, because you save yourself an awful lot of money with not much work.
Ding. Now there's a huge golden nugget there for the audience, and that's one that I hadn't anticipated coming out of this conversation, but that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Tell me about your journey, Lucinda, into the world of international trade, and how did you find your business? Where was your inspiration, and what sort of complexities are you helping businesses navigate? All fantastic. I'm really curious.
Well, going back to the very beginning, I did my degree in English literature and French, which of course qualified me for absolutely nothing, apart from teaching perhaps, which I knew I did not want to do. And so I got a temp job with an industrial flooring distributor, which I took just because it was quite close to where my parents lived, so I could roll out of bed at about 8:45 in the morning. And They imported this industrial flooring from Belgium and sold it to factories and warehouses all over the UK. And then the Belgian manufacturer was bought by an American company who are an absolute nightmare to deal with. So we decided to start manufacturing ourselves in the UK.
Yeah.
And obviously it made sense to export the product to increase, market, protect the business if things went south in the UK, as they tend to do every now and again. So I was traveling all over the world, finding and managing distributors, which was a lot of fun. We had customers in most of the European countries, as well as North America, Latin America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. And we were a small company, so I was responsible for the logistics and customs side of things as well. Once I'd sold it, I actually had to deliver it to them. And I found it really interesting, which I needed to take to a much deeper level when we left the EU, so that I could continue to supply our customers there without them having any additional admin or costs, because they sort of said, well, this is your problem, you deal with it, which I had some sympathy for. And in the process, it became really clear to me that there was a huge gap in the market for SME manufacturers who needed practical solutions to their import and export problems that were specific to their unique circumstances. Because most of the information that was out there, it was very generic. And it's no good giving someone the same advice who wants to import leather from Italy as someone who wants to, import plastic from France. It's just not the same thing at all. So after 20 years at EcoTile, I was ready for a change anyway, and I thought, right, the SME manufacturers need some proper support here. So that's when I set up my company to fill that gap.
Wow. So it's certainly not based on a whim. It's been based on your experience, and I guess, a whole host of learns and challenges along the way that you've had to deal with firsthand, which I think if you're consulting anybody, having that previous experience is worth its weight in gold, isn't it?
Yeah, and I find it absolutely fascinating, customs. I know it's a very dry subject for most people, but everyone's got their quirks, I suppose.
Yes.
And also, it's incredibly rewarding to help companies import and export successfully. As I said before, British-made products are in huge demand, and I passionately believe that a lot more British manufacturers should be exporting their products. Proven that exporters are more innovative, more profitable, they pay higher salaries, they're more resilient. So I'm on a real mission to get as many UK manufacturers exporting as I possibly can. And yes, it is difficult, but the challenges aren't insurmountable. The help is out there. And I really would encourage anyone who isn't at the moment to do it. Or maybe to start up again if you were exporting just to the EU before and then gave up because it was all too much of a pain with the new rules and regulations that came in.
Yeah. So for businesses that are already exporting or maybe have done it in the past, they will have some experiences that would, probably guide their decisions as to how far they want to grow internationally. But for UK manufacturers that haven't exported, and I know a lot of them already do, but for the ones that haven't, or maybe haven't done it for decades, what are the key factors today that these businesses should consider before entering, these new markets?
Yeah, you really need to do your research so that you're making informed decisions. Should you sell direct, or would you be better off finding a distributor or an agent? Understand any trade agreements that apply and what you need to do to take full advantage of them. Is your product going to be competitively priced once you factor in duty and transport? And it's essential to get your commodity code right, as everything customs related, the level of import duty that's payable, whether you need an export license, whether there are quotas available. everything stems from your commodity code. So make sure that that's accurate. And also understand the full implications of the Incoterms you're using. These are they relate to transport and delivery, and they determine who's responsible for the cost and the risk at each stage of the
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
A lot of people think they understand them, and then something goes wrong and they find out that they were liable for stuff that they didn't realize that they had actually signed up to. So yeah, make sure you don't just agree to the Incoterms that your customer asks you for without really understanding what you're agreeing to and making sure that you price your products accordingly.
Yeah. So there would be, not being, doing this type of work myself, would there be a sort of typical negotiation at that point in terms of, when you're going to sign up to something, is there a little bit of wiggle room or margin? Can a UK manufacturer sort of negotiate the contracts, taking these Incoterms into consideration? As you say, you don't really want to just say yes, you're going to supply, and then you have to fall in line with what the customer's asking. There could be other parameters or other processes or deliverables that make it as favorable for the manufacturer to export as it is for the international business to import them from the UK. I mean, how does that work? I'm just curious, and I'm sure other people that don't do export would probably be wondering, is it just a one size fits all? This is the process, or because a lot of businesses, I talk to them all the time, and customers king, not 100% of the time, most of the time, but I'm sure there's a lot of businesses that would want to feel that their products or services are adding value, but that they're not, they're not sort of operating at a disadvantage to maybe some of their competitors who might have other agreements. So how standardized is that sort of whole process?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And one of the fun things about international trade is there is always room for negotiation. So, with the bigger companies, payment terms being one of the most talked about ones, I guess.
Yeah.
They're going to say 60 or 90 days, and that's that. There's nothing you can do there. But there are other areas where you can push back, and Incoterms would definitely be one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, never just accept what's been presented to you without fully researching what the implications are going to be, and also talk to your transport company as well, and ask them for advice. They can really be your friend in this
Yeah.
situation. You don't want to be stuck doing the import declaration to a very remote, far-flung destination where it might be necessary for someone to actually go to the customs office in person.
Yeah.
That's just not going to work. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. But yeah, if you do find yourself having to agree to one thing that perhaps you're not 100% keen on, make sure you push back and get something that's really advantageous to you in return.
Yeah. And I suppose all these things are areas where you can advise your clients, your customers, because you've got the knowledge, you've got the experience, and for businesses that haven't been down this route before, I suppose it does, it will probably give them, a sort of sense of, well, there's risk anyway, isn't there? So there's risk of, what if something goes wrong? But then there's also that fear of, well, there's lots of red tape, there's loads of systems and protocols, and we don't really know what we're doing, so we're not gonna do it. We don't think it would be worth it, But this is where your expertise can bridge that gap for businesses to actually take the plunge and get exporting, right?
No, absolutely. It's not as difficult and time consuming and expensive as people often perceive it to be.
Yeah.
So if you've had an inquiry, and this is normally how people start exporting, it's very rare that a company sits down together on a Monday morning and says, right, by this time next year, we're going to be exporting these products to the USA. What happens is you get an inquiry from someone in the USA or Indonesia or wherever, and you think, oh, yeah, well, this could be quite profitable, and business at home is a bit quiet. Maybe it is time that we started looking further afield. And you just sort of learn as you go along, which is fine as long as you're getting good advice along the way to make sure you don't make any huge mistakes.
Yeah. Are there any other sort of misconceptions, that businesses have about international trade?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Probably is that it's too difficult and not worth the effort.
Yeah.
Or yeah, I think that is the main one that I come across. People think that it's more complicated than it actually is, and that it's not going to give them the same ROI as sales at home do. Whereas actually, if you find the right market for your particular product, export sales can actually be immensely profitable, especially if you manage to sign an exclusive agreement with whoever you're working with out there, and you're the first into that market.
Yeah,
it can be a real shot in the arm for your company.
So definitely worth looking at, for businesses that haven't exported before or haven't done it for years and years and years. It seems to me, it's a bit of a no-brainer. At least investigate what the possibilities are and have a look at it. Get and speak to an expert. Give Lucinda a call.
Yep, I endorse that 100%.
Absolutely. Okay, so what about sort of partnerships and collaboration? How important is collaboration and knowledge sharing in helping businesses, thrive in the global market?
Yeah, it's absolutely essential. I'm actually a member of it used to be the DIT, now it's the Department for Business and Trade's Export Champions scheme, which connects seasoned exporters like myself with people who are just starting out on that journey, who might need help with a particular problem or general advice on a market that they're considering entering. And it's a really fantastic resource. There are exporters all over the country who are prepared to, give away their expertise and their time for free to help other people succeed in that area. So I would really recommend tapping into that resource if there's something that you want some insight into.
And what about sort of any government initiatives? I know there's trade organisations, but in terms of government initiatives, what's available to support UK manufacturing? In terms of exporting.
Well, unfortunately, we seem to be in a bit of a hiatus at the moment. We're waiting to find out what is going to become available. And a really popular one that was excellent in the past was support for companies wanting to do trade shows as a way of testing a new market. There used to be financial support for that because there really is nothing like actually going to a country, talking to people face to face who could be interested in your product, to gauge, whether there is a market there, what the price point is likely to be, how difficult it's going to be. Again, going back to whether you should sell direct or through distributors, being on the ground is absolutely essential. So we'd all like to see that brought back. But because they've gone from being the DIT to the DBT, I think a few things have slipped through the cracks recently. So we're waiting to find out what's coming back online soon.
Oh, well, that's a watching brief then, and hopefully that facility will reappear. As you say, really useful.
It was really valuable.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just have a quick chat about technology and automation. I mean, it's everywhere. AI, machine learning, whatever, robotics. it's rife in manufacturing and engineering. In terms of, wider sort of business systems and operations, technology can really supercharge a business, can't it, in many ways? But in terms of international trade, are you seeing any sort of developments that that may impact UK manufacturing's ability to do better internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone who closely follows the progress of what I was talking about before, the digitalization of trade,
Yeah.
is going to be well ahead of the game, because the amount of paperwork that's currently generated moving goods from one country to another is there's a lot of it, and it all needs to be accurate. And at the moment, because there are so many different systems, you end up putting the same information into the different systems over and over again. So the digitalization developments is going to mean that for most of this information, you put it in once,
Yeah.
and then that communicates it to all of the other people involved, whether that's the customs brokers here, or the country that it's going to, the countries it's traveling through, the logistics companies, everybody.
Yeah.
So it's going to save a huge amount of time and also reduce costs, obviously. And it's going to go quite a long way to eliminating a lot of the fraud that exists in the system at the moment.
Yeah.
So I strongly urge anyone to pay attention to that and make sure that you're taking advantage as the digitalization progresses, because it will be a real game changer for everyone, and we are at the forefront of it. So we're in a really strong position to make the most of that right from the get-go.
Yeah. So being in that sort of position of strength, that there's going to be a whole host of advice and support available locally in the UK for businesses on that digitalization journey. Good.
Absolutely. But because most customs law follows English law to a certain extent and is written in English, it should be rolled out from here. Singapore is another very early adopter. The EU is well on its way to getting on board with it as well. I'm sure the States will too. So it's a very, very exciting development, and it's going to simplify things and speed things up dramatically.
Brilliant. Okay. And in terms of leadership, which is, that's my sort of backyard in terms of executive search and recruitment, I'm always talking about leadership, but international trade, businesses in the UK, leaders, in terms of skills, I mean, are there any, particular qualities or skills that you think, successful leaders have or should have for navigating successful international trade? Are there any sort of trends or typical skills or qualities that would lend particularly well to this environment?
Yeah, you need to be quite a brave person. Not too risk averse. You need to have the courage to exploit new opportunities when they arise. And I guess you also need to be pretty savvy to spot those opportunities on the horizon. You need attention to detail to make sure you stay compliant with the rules and regulations. But I think most importantly, you need to be able to think creatively to solve problems, because no 2 days in international trade are ever the same. And I know people who've been doing this for over 40 years, and they still say that things happen every now and again that surprise them and that they've never come across before. So creative thinking and a positive attitude are absolutely essential.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And in terms of any sort of entrepreneurs or, sort of startup businesses in UK manufacturing or manufacturing related tech that aspire to, scale up their business internationally, is there any specific advice you'd like to give those characters?
Yeah, go for it 100%, but do your research to ensure you understand the market you're selling to. One thing I haven't mentioned so far is the importance of cultural differences
Yeah.
and how that will affect your sales and marketing in particular, but also how you collaborate with your customers in other countries. Even in very closely aligned export markets, there can be huge differences that can lead to misunderstandings,
Mm.
and that can cause problems when you're trying to. And it's not just physical goods. I'm also talking about tech and gaming, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, make sure you understand the people that you're dealing with. You could do a whole other podcast on that, Jeff, I think.
Well, that's a good point. I'm going to make a note of that, and that would certainly make for an insightful discussion. Brilliant. Okay, and lastly, I mean, it's been a fantastic conversation so far, and I've really enjoyed you joining me as my guest, Lucinda. But are there any upcoming projects or any news that from your business, the International Trade Consultancy, that our listeners might be particularly excited about? What's sort of hot off the press from you?
Well, like many businesses, I'm customer led, and this wasn't something that I'd planned to do when I started the business. But lots of clients have asked me to offer customized training sessions that focus on their specific operations rather than the generalized training on individual large topics that's widely available.
Okay.
So the way I normally do this is I would visit site so that I thoroughly understand the business and where the gaps in my clients' knowledge are. And then I'll write a training program specific to that product, your customers, your export markets, because
Yeah.
there are so many variables and it makes a huge difference as to what you need to know. There's no point spending hours and hours understanding something that you're never actually going to use. So that's what I'm focusing on at the moment, and it's proving to be really popular because it often leads to streamlining processes,
Yeah.
which reduces costs and paperwork and improves profitability and cash flow.
That's what's most important to a lot of businesses. So great to hear about the training service offering. That's fantastic. So, Lucinda, that pretty much wraps up today's episode of Insights for Manufacturing. It's been a fantastic discussion. Hope you've enjoyed your time on the show. So thank you for coming on. Thanks to the audience for listening. So that's it for another episode. Look out for the next one. Insights for Manufacturing will be coming up again soon. So see you next time, and bye-bye.